This video is the third video showing the construction of the first level of the superstructure for this model. In the previous videos I prepared the pieces that you can see below, and they are now ready for installation on the ship. To glue the walls onto the ship I'll be using Trumpeter extra thin cement, the quick setting version. I haven't used this glue much, but I've heard good things about it, so I'm going to give it a go and see how it works out. To install the cladding, I'll place it on the model dry and then apply the extra thin plastic cement from the back to glue it in place. When applying the glue to a painted surface, the glue does dissolve the paint, and then when you put the brush back into the bottle, some of this paint then is dissolved into the glue in the bottle. This means that over time the glue will become cloudy and won't be perfectly clear anymore. I'm not concerned about this. On this ship it's especially of no concern because everything's in grey anyway, so having a slightly grey coloured paint won't matter. But in the future, for other models that I use this glue on, I'm also not really concerned because in the areas where I apply it, I will just repaint anyway. In placing these walls for the centre portion of the superstructure, you may notice that the wooden deck is in some areas going underneath the plastic. I'm not concerned about this because the majority of the contact surface for the glue is at the back of the part, so it doesn't need to be glued down at the very base. And this is also an area where the shelter deck will completely overlap the top of these walls. That means the precise height of these walls is not that important. It's just important that when I do glue on the shelter deck, everything is at the same height, and that can be corrected at a later stage through sanding. I had initially thought that I would need to use Revell Contactor Professional to glue these parts down properly, but so far my experience with this glue has been very good. It is quick setting as advertised in the bottle, and seems to be doing a very good job bonding them in place. When looking at these parts from the front, you can't see any glue seeping out of the gaps. It has bonded really nicely and very strongly and very quickly. Since this is going well, I don't see any need to use any other type of glue for this part of the build, so I'm going to continue and put down the rest of these walls using the same method and the same glue. This is one of the most relaxing times for building a model, for me at least. After spending a lot of time preparing these parts, I now get to install them on the ship in what is a relatively simple process that can go quite quickly and quite easily, and also visually you make quite a lot of progress. Which is also one of the nice things about ships that don't have disruptive camouflage, like the hood. In a case like this, you can actually glue down the parts as you build them. If this was the Roma, for example, I would construct almost completely the superstructure before gluing anything down, because the parts need to be loose so that you can properly align the camouflage pattern. That is obviously not a concern with this ship, so as they are ready and painted, they can be placed down. It's also worth noting, while I'm speaking about the Roma, that in this build I'm not going to be weathering as I go. I'm going to weather the majority of the ship at the very end, apart from one area, and that is these walls that I'm installing right now. These walls will be covered by the shelter deck and will be impossible to access at a later stage. So once this area has been fully constructed and before I install the shelter deck, I will weather this area. But that is still a few videos out. The only place where I find the fit not to be that good is for these small structures on the sides of the ship. The inner facing wall is the one that is giving me problems in particular, but the good thing about it being that wall is that it's also the most hidden wall. It's not going to be possible to see it once the shelter deck is installed, so if it doesn't fit perfectly, it doesn't really matter. As for the wall to the aft, it's also going to be quite significantly concealed. Certainly the joint lines will all be concealed, so it's only the forward section of wall that matters. And over there, one of the joints is on the inner section, where it also won't be seen, which leaves only the corner that faces either the port or starboard of the ship to be concerned about. To make sure that those walls are correctly aligned, I temporarily hold up the exterior section of walls to help align the parts. The exterior freestanding walls near the front of the ship are very easy to install. The wooden deck in this area leaves sufficient space for the bottom of the wall to make contact with the deck, and there's a small lip at the back which allows for a greater area to create a bond. As I stick down the exterior pieces, I place the shelter deck on top of them to ensure that everything is in correct alignment. It's important that the corners on the walls align with the corners on the deck, and that this is consistent from the forward to the aft of the shelter deck and from its port to its starboard. The installation at the aft of the superstructure proceeds in much the same way as for the forward section. In this area, there's a double height wall that transitions from the quarterdeck through the forecastle deck up to the shelter deck. Due to the preparation that I had previously done, these parts fit in very easily and are glued in place without any trouble. Once again, I put the shelter deck in place to check alignment. Since everything is aligning quite well, the last bit to install is this small section at the very aft of the superstructure. The fit is tight, which is good because it is the correct size and it fits in nicely. After giving the glue a few hours to dry, I move on to applying the putty to fill the gaps. I'm not going to fill every gap, I'm only going to fill the gaps in the areas where they will be visible. That is primarily around this center section where the wings are open at the sides of the ship, and the joints for all of the exterior walls. I use a toothpick to apply the putty to a gap, and in the locations where the gap goes down to the wooden deck, I place Tamiya masking tape on the deck first to prevent the putty from making contact with the deck. After applying the putty to all of the gaps and before it hardens, I remove the tape to remove a little bit of the excess putty before I start sanding. After giving the putty a few hours to dry, it can then be sanded. I start by using a bar file to remove the majority of the excess. And then I use 240 grit followed by 400 grit followed by 1000 grit sandpaper to finish the surface. After completing the more rough work for the parts in the center of the ship, I then move on to installing the delicate walls that go in the midship. These walls I install in the same method as I used to install all of the other walls. After placing them on the model, I glue them down with Tamiya extra thin plastic cement. And I once again place the shelter deck on the model to ensure that everything is correctly aligned. I then install the last of the plastic components, and that is these supports for the 4-inch anti-aircraft guns. I'm not sure if they're supports or if they're a shell elevator, or maybe it's a shell elevator and a support, but they sit under the 4-inch guns by the looks of things. Anyways, I also install them using Tamiya extra thin plastic cement. After giving the glue some time to dry, I then move on to filling the gaps that these components have introduced, once again using Tamiya plastic putty. The gap that runs between the base of the railing and the hull is by far the longest gap that needs to be corrected, and it is complicated by its close proximity to the degaussing cable. Nevertheless, I will give it my best effort to fill it. To try and limit the amount of excess putty that I put onto the kit, I mask off the area before I apply it, and then I remove the masking tape before the putty dries. Once the putty has dried, I then file the area as much as I can, and then proceed to sand it with 240 grit, 400, and then 1000 grit sandpaper. In this area there are a lot of small details that need to be preserved. To try and protect those details, I cover them with masking tape before sanding. This video is part of a build series on the HMS Hood. If you are enjoying this video and would like to see other videos in this build series, then follow the link to the playlist in the cards above. If you have questions that you would like me to answer, then feel free to post them in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe to help the channel. After a lot of sanding, and I really do mean a lot of sanding, I get the joints into a state that I am happy with, and I can then mask off the model in preparation for painting. To mask off the ship, I focus on masking off the areas where I need to paint right down to the wooden deck, which is in the minority of places because everything had been previously painted. In areas where I don't have to paint all the way down to the deck, I'm just putting down masking tape to protect the deck from getting sprayed. Once masked, I then spray the superstructure in Tamiya XF53. This is the same color as the hull. When spraying this joint line between the hull and the railing for this exterior section of the superstructure, you can see a few defects. Those defects I would normally correct in this video, but I'm not going to do that, because as one of my viewers suggested, I got hold of Mr. Surfacer 500 and Mr. Surfacer 1000, and I'm going to use that to try and fix those defects. That's going to come in another video, and that will be my introduction to those products. From what I can see, it's like a very thin putty, which could make things quite a lot easier than trying to thin Tamiya plastic putty and apply it. So I'm quite excited to give that a go. I'm hoping that it works out well and makes it a lot easier for me to correct these kinds of defects. But as I said, that is for another video, and we have come to the end of this video. In the next video, I also won't be correcting that area of the superstructure, but rather I'll be adding some additional details that this model and the super detail kit do not include. Primarily, I'll be installing posts inside these wing areas to support the shelter deck, and I will construct and install several ready lockers that can be repurposed from the shelter deck. If you would like to support this channel or see how this model looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.